This is a bigger problem with the federal government, that we don't preserve institutional expertise as efficiently as we should. That it shouldn't have been that hard to find those guys right away to deal with the problem, and it shouldn't rely on the accident of John Bolton firing Tom Bossert.
Welcome to On Brand with Donny Deutsch. I'm Donny Deutsch, and this is a podcast dedicated to a simple premise that everything today is a brand. Every person, every celebrity, every athlete, every product, every corporation, every movement, every religion is a brand. And we do two things on the show. First, we do a big interview, and today is with, I think, arguably one of the most important nonfiction authors of our time, if not the most, Michael Lewis. He's written countless books, The Blind Side, Moneyball, Big Short, Liar's Poker. We're going to talk to him about a lot of stuff and his brand. But first, we do what we call Brands of the Week on the show, which basically we look at the brands that are kind of driving the zeitgeist, who's up, who's down, and let's get right into it. Our first brand of the week are the Democrats. Brand down for the Democrats. Here's why, and it's pollster John Della Volpe, who's a Harvard pollster. This is scary to me for the Democrats. Since the 1980s, youth participation in national elections has shown too impossible to miss spikes. And that is the huge turnout among 18 to 30-year-olds propelled Democrats into power. They backed Biden by a 25-point margin in 2020. Here's why they get a brand down for the Democrats. Approval rating among 18 to 30 is in the low 30s in Gallup and other polls. That's pretty scary. It's bad enough that his overall approval rating is hovering around 40, but he's in the low 30s with a target group that he won by 25 points. That does not bode well for the midterm. So the youth vote which is an automatic Dem turnout vote, is certainly not feeling good about Biden and the Democrats. Brand down for Donald Trump for a whole bunch of reasons. Mainly the brand down, and he gets a brand down on the big lie. Here's what's interesting about the big lie, and the big lie is, of course, that the election was rigged. A new Morning Consult Political poll says, get this, that 67% of Americans think that if you tout the big lie, if you're a public official and you get up there and say the election was false, you should be prosecuted. It should be a crime. So almost 3/4 of Americans think it's a crime to say what Donald Trump is basing his entire foundation of his entire political comeback, if you will. That's all you need to about Trump. And also, secondly, Trump Social, his network his new social network is an adjunct failure. It was supposed to be up and full running, and they're having problems with it. Day one, they had 200,000 subscribers. They're down to 10,000 subscribers a day, which doesn't even show up on the app store charts. The two top executives have quit. And if you invested in Trump Social, you've already lost 40% of your money. And just one thing most New Yorkers know, other than a couple of successful buildings he's had, he's been a business failure. Everything he's touched outside of real estate has been a disaster, from steaks to water and everything in between. So brand down, as always, for Donald Trump. Brand up for Pennsylvania Governor John Fetterman. John Fetterman is the front runner. He's lieutenant governor, of Pennsylvania. He's running for Senate, and he's way out in front. He's a character. He's 6'8". He wears hoodies. He's got the goatee. But what's interesting about Fetterman is that, he's for very progressive things, such as marijuana legalization, $15 minimum wage, and transgender rights. Yet he's running as a populist. And I talked about this on one of our early shows, and how populism is the way Democrats need to brand themselves, even if they're progressives. Progressive in a general election is not a good word, but he's one of these characters that is different than the rest, and that's half of it in politics. That's the way Trump won. He looks different, he talks different, he acts different. He's a man of the people. I think he's going to beat whoever the Republicans bring forward. And speaking of Republicans running for Senate, one more brand down for Donald Trump. He endorsed Mehmet Oz, who has about as many credentials to run for Senate as Donald Trump had to run for president. He said, by the way, the reason, he says, because he's on TV, and if you're on TV, you're popular. And that was his intelligent response. Brand down for Oklahoma. Oklahoma lawmakers approved a bill banning abortions. The final approval of the bill passed the Oklahoma House last Tuesday. It basically says that you can sue doctors who perform abortions and file civil suits up to $10,000 against anyone who may try to perform an abortion. There you go. Another one of those really moving forward states. Oklahoma. Way to go, Sooners. A brand up for a young man. He's an 8-year-old, Sawyer Robbins. of course, Don't Say Gay, which is in Florida, and it's trying to happen in other states also. And he's got more common sense than the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis. We talk about these things. Don't Say Gay is, of course, that you can't talk about alternative lifestyles, gender choices, things like that with kids under third grade. And some people go, well, of course, you shouldn't talk about things, sexually orientation under third grade. And as a parent, I can listen. But here's the way an 8-year-old puts it, and here's what's interesting. It's something. This is Sawyer Robbins, and he kind of breaks it down to real life stuff. It's something they're not supposed to be talking about because when they're talking about Don't Say Gay, they're technically talking about gay. He said he understands the bill is this. He said, what if someone's parents are gay? He asked, you can't talk about your parents because they're gay. The first thing I sort of that happened to me not long ago, he said, I was telling a friend about my parents before this was a thing, and I didn't know what and he didn't know what lesbian meant. So I told him what that meant. I told him it means when a girl marries a girl. He said, that's weird. I said, I know. It's not their fault. They fall in love. He added, but now if a friend doesn't know what that is, I can't tell him. I can't even have the conversation we were having because of the Don't Say Gay bill. So this little boy couldn't even talk to another boy or talk in school about his parents. What happens when you draw pictures of your family? Is he not allowed to draw that he has two moms? He goes, it's stupid. It needs to go away because people might feel left out, might feel really sad and stuff. Everybody should be able to love everybody and be able to talk about it in school. So out of the mouth of babes. We talk about these things in very political terms, and you hear an 8-year-old talk about it, and kind of the travesty of it really comes to light. Brand up for libraries. Libraries are more popular than ever. That's a good thing. Even as people borrow fewer and fewer books. Researchers from Data and Analytics Group, Words Rated, looked at nearly 17,000 libraries over the last 3 decades and found that these institutions aren't dying in digital age. They actually may be thriving. Although visits have dropped by 21%, there are actually more people borrowing books than ever before. Specifically, over 174 million people in the country are registered at a local library. Overall, library collections are now bigger and more diverse than ever, growing by 113% in 2009. So in this digital age, it's nice to hear that libraries are still thriving. Brand up for Fortnite. Fortnite last week, actually for 2 weeks, between March 20th and April 3rd, dedicated $144 million, all their revenue, all their profits, to Ukraine relief. I mean, there you go. I think corporations can really, really make a difference. You've got Holland America, another brand up corporation. They parked one of their boats in Rotterdam, and they're taking Ukrainian refugees. They say they can accommodate over 50,000 people who fled the war in Ukraine over time, 1,500 people at a time. These companies need to do step up. If you do name a corporation or company, I could say something they could be doing for Ukraine. And particularly these 2 companies, Fortnite and Holland America, let's give them a brand up. I don't know how you brand down for working from home, and here's why. And I agree with this 100%. Most managers would fire workers or cut their pay if they refuse to return to the office. Good Hire, a company that does employment background checks, surveyed 3,500 American managers on their thoughts and feelings about remote work, return to the office mandates, and their preferred working model. Among the respondents, 77% they would be willing to take action against employees who demanded to work fully remote. The U.S. Bureau of Statistics shared that only 10% of Americans work remotely. But I'm one of these guys, and I've talked about this on the show before. People need to go to work, particularly young people. You really lose a lot of the experience and the mentoring by not being there. And if I was still running my company today, work at home would not be an option. And maybe I would lose some employees, but people need to be at work. It's one thing when it's not safe. And as the CEO of, I think, Morgan Stanley said, if you feel safe enough to walk into a restaurant, you can feel safe enough to go into work. Brand up for Tiger Woods. Didn't win the Masters, but, there's no athlete in the history of sports, and that includes Michael Jordan, that includes Muhammad Ali, that had an effect on their sport like Tiger Woods. Tiger Woods introduced golf to young people, period. Golf would not be a hip, young sport with young people playing without Tiger. He doubles the ratings when he plays on TV. And look, Jordan's Jordan, Ali's Ali, but basketball had come back before Jordan with Magic and Larry, and he brought golf back. So brand up for Tiger Woods. Brand up for a certain kind of sports bar. It's a sports bar that in Oregon that will show only women's sports. There you go. Anyone can find a bar that shows men's sports, but in Portland, Oregon, Jenny Nugent, I hope I pronounced that right, wanted to change that. The Sports Bra opened its doors this month with a mission to make great food and delicious drinks and provide a space that supports, empowers, promotes girls and women in sports in the community. So if you go in there, it's only women's sports. Now, As a marketer, I would say you're losing a big part of the audience because women like guys playing sports also. I'm not saying you shouldn't have women. I think a better idea would be maybe have one dedicated TV in a sports bar or two dedicated to women's sports. I'm all for that, but I'm not quite sure how this venture is going to play out. But I salute anybody going their own path. So brand up for the sports bra. Brand up for Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A is the best fast food chain according to Gen Z. Chick-fil-A's chain was not the top choice for 16% of teens. It was followed 14% Chipotle, 13% Starbucks. And there's a big drop, 4% McDonald's, 3% Dunkin' Donuts. So for young people today, Gen Z, teenagers, they beat Chick-fil-A 4x, 4% versus 16% McDonald's to Chick-fil-A. There's no comparison. So that's where the future is. Buy Chick-fil-A. You know, it's a private company, so you can't buy the stock. Brand down, big brand down for handguns. People living with handguns face twice the risk of homicide, study says. It's a new study by Stanford University. People living with handgun owners were 2.33 times as likely to become victims of homicide. And that they're 2.83 times as likely to die from homicides involving firearms. So interesting stat that if you have a gun in your home, that somebody in that household is more likely to face people living with that gun are twice the risk of homicide. No surprise there. Cracker Jack, big brand down. Cracker Jack is introducing, now this is not going to be popular, but I'm sorry I have to. They're introducing Cracker Jill on separate packages, a new character, and their reasoning, which I agree with the reasoning, is they want to give more attention and prominence to women's sports. Cracker Jack is associated with sports. But I'm a believer of some names are just names, and they, Sarah Lee Pound Cake is not Sammy Lee Pound Cake, and Bazooka Joe Gum is not Bazooka Joanne Gum. And it's okay to have a Mr. or a Mrs. in your product name, and it doesn't mean we have to even the score. I think it's an iconic name, and I think they're diluting it. So I'm going to get some heat from this, but brand down for Cracker Jack. Brand down for Burger King. Just like Pop-Tarts was being sued, they're being sued by customers who claim the Whopper is small and advertised. It's a class action suit. 4 Burger King customers are suing the chain over its marketing, claiming the company makes the burger look about 35% bigger in advertising reality. Here's what I wonder. These people, what are you doing with your lives that you took the time to notice that something in a picture, by the way, all pictures of food look better and more robust than they do in just like all people in ads look better and more robust than that's what we have, photography and all the accoutrement you can do with pictures. I don't think anybody is buying that burger because of the picture, because it looked a little bigger and things. So I think some of you people need lives. But we got to give a brand down for Burger King because they're under suit. And finally, a brand down for Lucky Charms. This is very upsetting. According to the New York Post, the FDA is investigating illnesses linked to Lucky Charm. Hundreds of consumers have reported becoming ill after eating Lucky Charms cereal. 139 consumers complained that they began vomiting and experiencing diarrhea after eating a bowl of Lucky Charms. That's a small number. So I'm going to rescind my brand down for Lucky Charms. Yes, 100 people got sick, but I'm a big Lucky Charms guy. So I'm going to rescind it and give them a brand we'll see. And those are our brands of the week. Let's get right to our interview with Michael Lewis. You're going to really enjoy this. One of the smartest, most interesting guys around. And here's my interview with author Michael Lewis. There's that sound again. It's another sale on Shopify, the all-in-one commerce platform to start, run, and grow your business. Let me say this simple. If you got anything to sell, Shopify is the way to go. It's a platform designed for anyone to sell anywhere, giving entrepreneurs the resources once reserved for big business, customized for your needs with a great-looking online store that brings your idea to life and tools to manage day-to-day and drive sales. Making your idea real opens endless possibilities. Shopify believes in liberating commerce for all because entrepreneurship has the power to drive communities forward and commerce a force for good. I have experience with Shopify. It's the way you got to sell anything, it's Shopify. Get started by building and customizing your online store with no coding or design experience. Access powerful tools to help you find customers, drive sales, manage your day-to-day. Plus, with 24/7 support, you're never alone. It's more than a store. Shopify grows with you. This is a possibility powered by Shopify. Go to shopify.com/Donny, all lowercase, for a free 14-day trial and get full access to Shopify's entire suite of features. Start selling on Shopify today. Go to shopify.com/Donny right now. Shopify.com/Donny. This was a good one, guys. Go to Shopify and check it out. I am thrilled that today's guest, Michael Lewis. Michael Lewis, I think, is by far the most important nonfiction writer of our time. His credentials speak for themselves. He's written over a dozen books, all of them either #1 Times bestsellers or bestsellers. 5 have been made to movies. 3 of them, The Big Short, Moneyball, and Blindside, were made into either Oscar or Oscar-nominated movies. His most latest book that I want to talk a lot about is The Premonition, A Pandemic Story, which came out last year. He's got a new audiobook of one of his classics, Liar's Poker, one of my favorite, and his Against the Rules podcast, episode 1 of season 3. And we're going to talk about the first 2 seasons. Just incredible stuff. Michael, thanks so much for being here.
Donny, thanks for having me.
All right. I want to start with Wall Street Journal has a quote. He says, his calling card, echoed by untold critics and readers, is this: he makes boring stuff interesting. That's the Wall Street Journal. Do we like that?
Yeah, we like that. So I do think that I think I'm opportunistic as a writer. I think I'm more opportunistic than most writers. I think a lot of writers kind of come at their job idealistically. And I come at it like as a little bit of a former Wall Street person.
Yeah.
And I'm looking for arbitrage opportunities. And the arbitrage opportunity is when the world thinks something's boring and I think it's really interesting.
Yeah.
If I can find a subject that gets me up in the morning, gets my juices flowing, but nobody else thinks they're interested in it, that's an opportunity because it's an opportunity to take everybody's attention and say, hey, look at this.
How do you find, give me the magic moment. Take The Blind Side, for instance. How did you stumble across that young man in that story? How does that, just give me the genesis of, okay, this appeared in front of me.
It did appear in front of me. So it's a bit of a story, so you got to give me a minute to tell it.
Please, that's what we're here for.
I was going through Memphis, Tennessee anyway in 2004, maybe, 5. And I was in the process of writing a little book about my high school baseball coach and about the importance of that man in my life as a teacher.
Which is one of your podcast seasons, right? Okay.
Called Coach, right? And we used it. That's some of that material for the podcast. And I thought I really ought to talk to my former teammates. And one of my favorite former teammates was Sean Toohey, who was he's the Tim McGraw character in The Blind Side. He's the dad in the Blind Side family. We'd been in school together from age 5 to age 17, and I had not seen him since high school. So this is really kind of funny. He picks me up at the airport, and ostensibly to go to his house, just talk about Coach Fitzgerald. And 2 things happened that I can't shake. I can't shake my memory. The first thing he says to me when I get in the car is, "So who writes your books?" and I said, I write my books. And he goes, "No, I know you're out there like marketing them and talking to people about them. And all that. You're really good at selling them." He says, "But who puts the words on the page?" And I said, "Sean, I put the words on the page." He goes, "No, you don't. You're a dumbass just like me who sat in the back of English class and got C's. There's no way you write those books." You
were a fuck up growing up in high school and junior high school.
There's no way you write those books. So you're lying to me. So like the whole way to his house is me trying to persuade him I write my books. But then we get there, and in his living room is a 6'5", 350-pound African-American kid sitting on the sofa, 16 years old. Sean doesn't even introduce me to him. Shows me around the house and off we go. And I said, like, "Well, who's he?" And he says, "Oh," and then he tells me the story. He was on the bus stop in the snow in his shorts, and he was clearly homeless, and he'd come to their kid's school. And he said, he's Leanne's project. Leanne was his wife.
Right.
And he says, I said, "What do you mean?" He says, well, I mean, what he basically meant was that they were taking this destitute, basically effectively orphaned, homeless child off the streets of Memphis and turning him into a rich white evangelical Republican who rooted for Ole Miss. And I started watching this thing, and it was this. In some ways, it's a very paradigmatic story. It's a very classic. It's a Pygmalion story. And I was watching him interact with the family, and while I was doing this, I was on the heel. Moneyball had come out, right? And I was talking to professional football teams about doing something in professional football. And the whole professional football story was about like how they distributed money across their payrolls because they all had the same amount of money to spend. And when you started looking at what they'd done with their payrolls, you saw that there was this position, the left tackle, who protected the quarterback's blind side, that had gone from being the lowest paid person on the field to among the most highly paid people on the field. And as I'm watching Michael Orr and the Tooheys just a separate story and thinking like, he's my high school friend. I'm not going to write about this, but I'm just interested in it. Sean calls me and says, Michael has just been identified as a future NFL left tackle. And all of a sudden, that kid was on the receiving end of national attention. And all of a sudden, he was this prized possession. A year into staying with them, when no one really had any idea about this before. Sean was training him to be like a junior college basketball player so he could get him into college.
Right.
So I thought, what's the story? The story was this kid goes from, the least valued kid in America to one of the most highly valued kids in America. What are all the forces at work here? And one of the forces was what had happened in NFL football to prize what he could do so uniquely well. But another force was a family and a mom.
Yeah.
And so these two stories kind of came together in my head, and it became the book.
And I know how Liar's Poker came about. We're going to talk about your time at Solomon Brothers. And where'd you find Billy Bean from Moneyball? How did that come? I mean, but one of my 5 favorite movies of all time, by the way. I've probably have watched that movie a dozen times in addition to reading the book.
I love the movie too. And I had nothing to do with it.
Yeah, but you had everything to do with it. The book, the book is spectacular. But how did you? Give me the derivation of that. That's what I'm fascinated stuff. Your stuff. After you read it, you go, okay, this is a story that needs to be told. And I kind of go like, where's the nugget? Where did it start?
So that's funny. I mean, it's very undignified beginnings, all of them. They always start it's like going to visit my old high school friend. I find this story. I had just started to pay attention to baseball again in the late 90s because it had just been out of the country for a little bit. And I was struck by the free agency had hit in a big way, and the salaries are starting to explode. And the first question I had, and I was watching the game, and they said that the right fielder was paid $150,000 and the left fielder was paid $8 million. And I had a question. And the question was how pissed off is the right fielder when the left fielder drops a fly ball? Is there class resentment emerging and you would think it might happen, right? You're not that much better than me. How come you're getting paid that much more than me? That kind of thing. So I started watching the money on the field. And then it became clear that the resentment between the players wasn't a thing. That what was a thing was the difference in the money that was between organizations. And that you had, the Oakland A's have got a $30 million payroll and the New York Yankees have a $120 million payroll. In an efficient marketplace, the A's shouldn't be able to compete. I mean, the Yankees should just buy all the best baseball players and the A's are screwed. So that seemed to be a legitimate question. And I looked at this, called Billy Bean up. I sent him a note and said, I'm interested in talking to you about this question, what you're doing. And he said, come on in. And when I got there, this is like the arbitrage opportunity. He said, this is the question I spend my life thinking about. Money, how I find bargain baseball players, how I get rid of expensive ones. All of my life is basically like a Wall Street trader. And no one ever asked me about it because the sports writers all think this is beside the point. It's all I do. And he says, so I'm interested in talking to you because no one has talked to me about this. And I thought, wow. I mean, that was the beginning of it. But for it to sort of, it usually takes many months before I get conviction about the book. And the book side of things, it really was, I mean, there was a moment. It was a funny moment. It was that I was interviewing the players to see what they made of this whole science experiment that was the Oakland A's. And I was in the clubhouse interviewing a player after a game. And for whatever reason, I noticed for the first time the Oakland A's coming out of the showers. So I saw them naked for the first time, and it was a repellent sight. They were fat, they were they were misshapen in various ways, and I thought these aren't professional athletes.
Right.
And I said that to the front office, and they said that's actually one of the points. Said we find bargains when they don't look right. That if we find in the statistical analysis they can do something, if they don't look right, the market doesn't see their value. So that's when I thought, this is a book. It's a book about again, kind of about value, about how people get valued or misvalued by our marketplace. Not just baseball players. Baseball players are corporate employees who you would think of any corporate employee is going to be properly valued to be them. It's a pretty simple job.
Yeah.
They're watched by everybody. They got stats. if they're misvalued, who isn't misvalued? And I thought that's the center of I got to figure out how to tell a story, but that's at the center of the thing.
It's just
so it usually starts with like a question or
something
or curiosity. And why is that that way? And most of the time, I have those questions. It doesn't lead anywhere,
right?
But sometimes it leads somewhere.
Obviously, I know where Liar's Poker came from, your time at Solomon Brothers. It's fascinating how you went to school and what you studied and how you ended up as a bond trader, because the line doesn't make sense with everything you studied for and where I know you went to London School of Economics, but still nobody would have ever thought you as a bond trader at Solomon Brothers.
Bond salesman, the traders would be offended.
Okay.
So I studied art history in college. It's where I figured out I wanted to be a writer. My senior year, didn't know quite how to go about doing it. So I needed to make a living, and after graduate school, the job just fell in my lap. I mean, I was at a dinner party, and the wife of the head of Solomon Brothers International was sitting next to me, and afterwards she said, "You got to come work for my husband," and he kind of made it happen. So I got in through the back door, and knowing that I wanted to write, and there's a.
But it'd be fun. It's fun to make a couple $100,000 a year.
And also had a sense that like writers are better off. Even then, I didn't know what kind of writer I wanted to be. I actually oddly had this funny ambition to be a playwright. But I thought writers are always better off having had experiences, having gone and done things. Even being on a whaling ship or being a longshoreman or whatever it is, it's like doing anything is better than just sitting and staring at your navel. You just learn things about yourself, about people, about the world. It gives you material to write about. And it was clear even before I got inside Solomon Brothers that I was going to be sitting at somewhere near the center of the financial universe at a time when the financial universe was more interesting than it had ever been.
Yeah.
It was exploding. So I had some vague sense that this might be material. I didn't go in thinking I was going to write a book about it, but I did go in thinking like, this is something if I learn about one day, I might write about.
What did you see, if you look back now at Liar's Poker, what were the signposts that allowed the Big Short to happen, that allowed obviously the crisis? What do you look back now and say, I can understand why we know why the housing crisis happened, but in behavior on Wall Street and attitude, tell me the kind of like, obviously this was going to happen because of what I saw in Liar's Poker.
So I'll preface all this by saying I certainly did not see it coming. That in fact, why I even got interested in going back to Wall Street for another book with The Big Short was I was so shocked by the fact that it happened. And I was shocked particularly, I mean, look, think about our financial system that from a few years before the time I go to work at Solomon Brothers, all the way up to the financial crisis, the big banks had almost first call on the talent in the society. This is a highly educated talent. That a third of the class of Princeton, Harvard, Yale all want to go work in Stanford, all want to go work on Wall Street, and that these people they're supposedly the smartest. They're obviously very financially motivated. The whole point of these businesses is to make money. What shocked me was they blew themselves up. That all of a sudden you woke up and Merrill Lynch lost $50 billion and Citigroup had lost $70 billion and a single trader at Morgan Stanley had lost $10 billion. You thought, like, how did all these supposedly really smart, self-interested people come together and commit suicide? That was the thing that surprised me. Now, after the fact, and when I started to dig into it, I guess I should have said, I should have seen it coming, or should have seen something coming. Because when you dig into it, what was happening was incentives were getting really screwed up. The guy lost $10 billion trading bonds at Morgan Stanley, but the year before that, he got a $50 million bonus for putting those positions on.
Yeah.
And you saw the incentives start to get screwed up in the 80s. And the big change that connects Liar's Poker to the financial crisis is the world I walk into, with the exception of the firm that I went to work for. All those firms were still partnerships. Like the people who were making the bets owned the firm. And if the bets went wrong, they didn't just lose their firm. A lot of times they lost their houses.
Yeah.
So they weren't going to be making giant bets on subprime mortgages in those firms. The minute they become public corporations and it's other people's money, it's shareholders' money. And the minute the bonus system starts to incentivize essentially it started to incentivize selling a lot of catastrophe risk, that you got yourself in a situation where nobody was really watching the risk in the way they would if they owned the risk.
You think Wall Street today is even more dangerous? I read where you said that. What do you see? You haven't written a book in the year 2022 about where we are, but there's a lot of underpinnings that are going on right now that harken back to the housing bubble crisis. There's a frothiness out there. There is a certain things don't make sense, and to me, there's something in my tummy says we're headed for some kind of Armageddon. I hate to be a pessimist, but I just living the life. I'm an older guy now. I can't believe I say I'm an older guy. I sound like such an asshole. But I'm not a kid I'm not a kid anymore. I'm in my 60s, and just the ebbs and flows. Something tells me something's not right in the system.
Yeah, I can see why you think that. I think when I look at it, when I think of the direction a financial crisis might come from, I think it's changed. I do think that post 2008, the banks are on a more solid footing. They got more capital. They're taking less of the kind of risk that they took back then. In theory, they're not taking any of it, but they are. I don't think a crisis starts in the banking system. What worries me is the federal government. It's the Treasury. It's the Federal Reserve.
Yeah.
It's what worries me is that we have the whole financial system is premised on the riskless asset, on the U.S. Treasury bond being a riskless asset. There are however many tens of trillions of the dollars of these things out there. It's everybody just happily assumes that the United States is good for it, and that the dollar is the reserve currency of the world. The dollar's position as a reserve currency is maybe not that threatened, but it would not shock me if people start to doubt like our solvency. I mean, that our willingness to we're living irresponsibly financially as a country, and have been for a long time.
If I ran a business for years, and if you looked at the balance sheet of the U.S. government, you'd say this is an over-leveraged, dangerous corporation.
And the Federal Reserve has really inflated the money supply in really dramatic, unprecedented ways, and it's created all kinds of odd distortions in the system. I understand why they did it. I'm not sitting here thinking, "Oh, I'd have done it better." I don't know. But it does feel like the problem. One of the characters in The Big Short said, at the bottom of the run up to the crisis was the desire of Americans to live beyond their means. People were using the inflation in the housing market to live beyond their means, and it was sort of like helping the public deceive itself into thinking it was more affluent than it actually was. And it does feel like that problem hasn't completely gone away.
I was going to say, that sounds like today. It
doesn't have really gone away. I know that individual balance sheets are much sounder than they were back then, but we don't feel like a completely stable society, and we feel like a disturbed society. On the other hand, I say that, but if you ask me what I do with my own money, I can't imagine a better investment than this country. So I'm obviously of two minds about it. I'm not sitting here thinking that, we're going to have a financial crisis. I don't know. I mean, I don't have exactly the same feeling in my tummy about the financial system you do. I do have a feeling in my tummy about how disturbed the country feels.
Oh, well, that's in my tummy. That's in my head. That's in my buttocks. That's everywhere. Premonition of pandemic.
It's in your buttocks?
It's in my buttocks. It's everywhere. It's throughout my body. Because I do all this MSNBC stuff, so I'm following the news, pretty intensely every day. And it I once again sound like an old guy. I can't remember us in worse shape, just in terms of, and obviously so much of this has to do with our former president, but it's the institutions are so vulnerable at this point in time. The institutions that we take so for granted that just starting with democracy. And it is, we are so on the precipice. It is so fragile right now. And I think the people don't understand that. Certainly 40% of this country does not understand that.
I agree with that. I agree with that. That people have take for granted all kinds of things that you really shouldn't take for granted. What and you know, and if you told me or asked me what it would take for the country to figure out that it can't take like its federal government for granted, I'd have before the pandemic, I'd have said that would do it. Like 1 million people dead from a virus that we didn't control properly, that we will rally together and figure out we got problems. And we didn't. So that's one of the reasons I feel so uncomfortable right now is I would have thought that kind of external threat would be all it would take. And it clearly is going to take more than that before we start to behave in a more cohesive way.
That's a good segue into Premonition. It's almost a year since it's out. And what's fascinating about the book, it's not a finger-pointed book. You're more focusing on the little heroes that saw it coming, that could have prevented it, and they weren't listened to. And if anything, the CDC kind of comes out as, I don't want to say the bad guy, but certainly asleep at the wheel. I mean, it's easy to blame Trump, and he could have been a hero, but it certainly didn't start or end with him. But talk to me about some of your favorite characters and just get the audience up to speed on how some very people you've never heard of saw this thing coming and they just weren't listened to.
So I put it slightly differently because it wasn't that they were sitting there predicting there was going to be a pandemic, but they were sitting there preparing for one.
Okay.
And it was, with one exception, there was one of the characters would have said, I'm predicting that this is going to happen. But it was very similar to the story in some ways is very similar to The Big Short. It's my attempt to depict a broken system. In The Big Short, it's the financial system. In this case, it's the system of public health in the country. And a really complicated system. And who to go to sort of to shine lights on that system. In the case of The Big Short, it was the people who actually had made big bets on the whole thing collapsing. And so they had a certain credibility. But more importantly, they had the ability to teach you what they saw, that they had this lived experience that enabled them as teachers to sort of show you what was wrong with the financial system. In this case, I went and sort of cast the book with 3 different kinds of people who gave you 3 different kinds of insight into what was going on. It wasn't. I don't really think of this as the story of the pandemic. It ends in like May of 2020. It's a story of the run up to it. And if you knew that story, you know that we were going to have problems when the thing happened. So one of the characters, I love the characters. I think the characters might be the best characters I've ever had. But the 2 characters Richard Hatchett and Carter Mesher, both doctors, both not political people. In fact, nobody in the book is really a political person. They're all kind of doctors.
Yeah.
Who were brought into the Bush White House when Bush realizes that second Bush the son, that we don't have a pandemic plan, and they're brought as part of a team to figure out what the plan should be, and they're assigned Richard Hatchett and Carter Mesher are their names, and they're assigned this particular sliver of the problem that is actually the most explosive part of the problem. What do you do between the time the disease shows up, pandemic disease, and the time you have a vaccine? They're thinking about the flu, but it applies to anything. And so they were both, so Carter Mesher, let's take one of the characters. What I loved about him was, he's an ADHD doctor, that he just like attention, he has attention for nothing except in a crisis, and ends up being this fantastic ICU doctor. He's unbelievable in the clutch, saving people's lives. And he's able to port that ability. He goes in his career from saving lives to saving a broken hospital to saving a broken hospital system to saving a society. He does stuff in the White House that's just intellectually really interesting. Like when they show up, there's a conventional wisdom in the public health world that social interventions, like, I don't know, closing schools or whatever it is you're doing, or closing churches or socially distancing people, don't work. there's this, that they don't work and that people won't do them and they cost too much, all that. And this wisdom goes back to 1918 when lots of different cities tried lots of different things. And from a 50,000 foot view, it looked like, oh, well, they had deaths everywhere. What Carter and Richard do in the White House is they go reinvestigate the history of the 1918 pandemic. And they find that, oh, no, it wasn't the same everywhere. That St. Louis had half the deaths or a third the deaths of Philadelphia. And the reason they had that is that they introduced these interventions earlier in relation to the arrival of disease in the city, and they slowed it. So these things really actually did work. And by the way, we haven't really done this in this country yet, but someone's going to go back and say, Miami has triple the deaths of San Francisco. Why?
Well, it's not hard to figure out.
No, hard to figure out, right? So, but if I were taking the other side, I might say, oh, maybe Miami has more older people.
Right.
There are other things you might say. So,
right.
But yes, you're right that there is a postmortem to do that never was properly done in 1918. That they went and did by going through old news articles, and it's really riveting kind of exercise. And then they go and persuade the entire U.S. public health infrastructure that it's a smart idea to have, depending on the potential severity of the virus, to have different kinds of interventions that you would introduce. And they sell not only the CDC, they write the CDC's plan. The CDC's plan is distributed around the world. I mean, if you go talk to people in Australia, like where their playbook came from to minimize death, it's from this. So, these people, when you read the story of how hard it was for them to sell the idea in the United States, even before Trump, this is back in 2005, 6, 7.
Sure.
You would have seen how hard it was going to be to execute once it happened. And in particular, what they found was even with like public health people who were very resistant to like being willing to get into political warfare about like closing schools. The only thing that persuaded them was children's deaths. So if that in a case of a flu, you get a lot of kids sick and dying. That only the emotional punch of the threat to children's lives swayed people in a room when they were presented with this plan. So you could see that if some pathogen happened to sweep through that didn't really do much damage to children, but did a lot of damage to older people, you might have a different political response, even within the public health.
It's funny. My marketing instincts told me that because I talked a lot on television about how do you get people to get vaccinated? And I said, make it about the kids. If you're not going to do it for yourself, do it for the children. And that's that. There's no greater motivator for any action than children being harmed, children being hurt, children being killed.
Right. That's exactly right.
That's
exactly right.
The other hero of the story, and I say that facetiously, is John Bolton, who came in and fired these guys.
Oh, well, so that's the interest. Yeah, it's almost a footnote. But so Carter and Richard, arguably the world's greatest experts in pandemic management at the federal level. In any case, the people who watched them do what they did were in awe of them. Obama keeps Carter on into the Obama administration. Tom Bossert, who was with them in the Bush White House, was also in the Trump White House in Homeland Security. Bossert, when he gets there in the beginning of the Trump administration, says to the people around him, says, if we have a pandemic, there are two guys I want running it. Their names are Carter Mesher and Richard Hatchett. Can I badge them in now so we don't have to waste a day if we need them? So it's all teed up for these guys to run any kind of pandemic response. And John Bolton comes in, fires Bossert, and with Bossert goes basically the institutional memory of these two guys. So when the pandemic hits, Hatchett is running a organization in London, and Carter Mesher is working for the VA, but people don't even know he's there, and he's basically kind of writing emails in his underpants in his bedroom in Atlanta,
right.
And writing these single best emails about what's going on in the world. He's got a complete bead on what's going on in China, got a complete clear argument about what we need to do, and he can't get himself heard. So this is a bigger problem with the federal government, that we don't preserve institutional expertise as efficiently as we should. That it shouldn't have been that hard to find those guys right away to deal with the problem, and it shouldn't rely on the accident of John Bolton firing Tom Bossert.
That's a good segue into the podcast, the new season.
Yeah,
it is a must hear podcast. Against the Rules, season 3 just dropped. Talk to us about the essence of season 3, and are there 7 episodes? How many episodes in season 3?
it's every season. So let me just describe the enterprise a little bit.
Yeah, well, why don't you just for people who haven't listened, talk to me about season 1 and 2. Just kind of
it's a little different. It's a different enterprise than this because it's scripted. I'm slaving over the writing of the thing, and it's really like the things that we do. They look like film scripts before we record them, and they're stories. And the conceit for the whole show, which is now in its 3rd year, is I wanted to take a character, like a role in American life, and explore what happened to it through a series of 7 stories. So the first season was about referees in American life. The second season was about coaches, and the third season is about experts. And they're all authority figures. It's all about the volatility of the role and problems with the role. So this particular season, I wanted to do experts because I just finished the Premonition, and one way to look at the U.S. pandemic response, which was appalling, is as an expert problem. We didn't figure out. There was never any consensus about who knew and who should be listened to, and just the reverse. The kind of people who actually had on the ground battlefield sort of experience fighting disease were local public health officials. They were low status. They were buried in our society, and they didn't have the moral or political authority to do the job they needed to do. And I fixed that in the Premonition. I sort of redressed that problem by making one of these local public health officers a woman, the main character of the story. And she dazzles you with her understanding of what should be done. And dazzles you with the bravery with which she did what she did. That led me to okay, let's take a back away and do a broader thing about experts. And it wanders a little bit. It's 7 different stories and addresses the problem from several different angles. I mean, we have one episode. One episode is kind of the Moneyball episode. There are kind of 2 episodes that are sort of related to Moneyball in that it was really interesting to me after Moneyball to watch the way who the expert was in professional sports changed. That instead of the guy who had spent his career in the minor leagues and worked his way up in the organization, it was a geek with a laptop who was all of a sudden making the decisions about how to build a team. That the data is kind of a new thing. It's the last 40, 50 years we've and really only the last kind of 20 years that we've really had the ability to gather and analyze huge piles of data. Yeah. And that has transformed who the expert is in a lot of spaces. So we devote an episode to that. Related to that is there's an episode about fields in which the experts have clearly gotten better, but that the people who consume the expertise clearly think the experts have gotten worse. Oddly, I'll give you an example of this.
Give me an example, yeah.
Well, there are several examples. Medicine is a great example. Yeah. You talk to any doctor, I mean, they know more now than they did 10 years ago, and a lot more than they did 20 years ago. And 100 years ago, they were more likely to kill you than to help you.
Yeah, we go on WebMD or anywhere on the net. We're all
that's right. And that's exactly
ourselves.
Right. They say, you had a sense of what might happen in the pandemic. You talk to nurses and doctors, say, yeah, this is outrageous that we have people thinking that we're trying to kill them when they come to the hospital. But if you'd have watched what was happening around here before that, you'd have found there's enormous confusion in the patient base about the nature of our expertise, that they're much more likely to come in thinking they know when they don't know, and much less likely to actually just listen to what we have to say. So
every doctor tells me that. My friends are the doctors, so I got to deal with everybody walking in telling me, no, I read this, and I can't wait to listen to it.
But the doctor's one example, but Weathermen. you talk to an old weatherman, like the guy who's been doing the weather on we have a character who's like second most famous person in Alabama. His name is James Spann, and he's been the weatherman for 50 years. And he says, when I started out, I kind of look outside and say, it's the sun's out,
Right.
and that my 10-day forecast would have been useless. Not as you could have done better guessing, or I was well guessing. The 3-day forecast was kind of I didn't know anything. He said, but I was on the air pretending to be completely certain. He said I was Ron Burgundy. I was out there and I was like, we knew. And
Right.
he says, my career has been, I know more and more and more about the weather. My 10-day forecast is actually now not bad. My 3-day forecast is like 3 times as accurate as it used to be. And especially with like deadly weather events, like predicting where the tornado is going to touch down and wind and hurricanes. He says, this has just been transformative. We used to know nothing. Now we know a lot. He said, but I sound less certain because I'm speaking in terms of probabilities. I'm saying 70% chance, 60% chance. And the effect is people doubt me in ways they didn't used to doubt me when I didn't know anything.
Yeah, he's so much more equipped to actually do a good job. It's interesting.
Yeah, exactly. He says, he's the bane of his existence. This is the bane of all these people's existence, is that they tell the people the tornado's about to hit their house and the people don't listen. And I mean, we have these incredibly deadly events that are completely avoidable because there's a gap there's this disconnect between the experts and the people who need the experts. It's a similar situation to the medical situation. So we explore that in another episode. I love this. I actually love the season. I'm not quite finished it. The episode I'm working on, just about to record, is about the role men, especially male overconfidence, plays in interfering with expertise. The whole mansplaining thing, that the guy who knows less is telling the woman who knows more about her own business. But you start to explore this overconfidence and where it goes, and the society's tendency to view men as experts quicker than they view women as experts. There's a whole thing. There's a Facebook group of female doctors who've had the experience of being on airplanes when there is a medical emergency.
And they don't want them. The people don't want them being taken care of by them.
It's worse. The flight attendant says, "Is there a doctor on the plane?" She raises her hand, and the flight attendant just walks by, and it just like, I'm here, and
right.
No, it's a rich subject. It's sort of because it takes you to this place that's interesting to me anyway, of like how knowledge gets distributed in the society. If you back away from America, we've been like magically good at generating new knowledge. We are incredibly innovative. We are the home to all the greatest research universities. The federal government has been an unbelievable source of generation of knowledge. That we are a knowledge creation factory, and we are so dumb. Like, how is this knowledge? How are we so good at creating knowledge and so bad at using it? That's sort of the big picture.
Yeah, I don't know if this is a part of the episodes, but one of the problems is technology. Is that basically everybody can create their own truths now. You create bespoke media. You can whatever you believe you can find. So it's so hard to separate real fact from fiction.
So I think that's definitely part of the story. Definitely part of the story is the knowledge is complicated. So if all of a sudden you're asked to do probabilistic thinking, it's just harder to evaluate the expertise. If the weatherman tells me that there's only a 30% chance of rain, and I go and plan a picnic and I get rained on, I don't think, oh, well, there was a 30% chance of rain 3 in 10 times this was going to happen. I think the weatherman's an idiot. He doesn't know what he's talking about. I mean, people don't think it's sort of like the human mind is not equipped to move as fast as our society has moved in generating knowledge. That those kind of experts who deal in probabilistic judgments have trouble making themselves understood to their audience. Nate Silver, really good example.
Yeah.
Political forecasting. Everybody thinks he doesn't know anything because he said there was the Hillary Clinton
was going to win by the way,
70%.
Yeah, but I mean, they weren't paying attention to the actual states that make, everybody was like, oh, Hillary's up by 4 points. And she did win by 2 or 3 percentage points. It didn't matter. She lost the states that matter. All right, Michael, final question, because you've been so generous with your time. No, the essence of this program is that the thesis that everything is a brand today. Every person, every celebrity, every company, every product is everything is a brand. And the question I ask everybody: so tell me what's the Michael Lewis brand?
God, you could probably tell me better than I could tell you, but you put me on the spot because I haven't really thought about that.
Mm-hmm.
But if I would say that his books are fun and they teach me things.
I think that's pretty good.
It's sort of like fun education.
Yeah, I think it's. I would add on to that you take some of the most complex problems, situations, realities, and distill them to their essence so that they're very, very digestible.
Okay. I'm buying it. I'll buy that brand. I'll buy that brand. But I'm not sure I have.
I think your brand. I think your brand is. If you hire me, I'd say the best nonfiction writer in the world. All right. That's
nice of you.
That's my brand. That's my brand for you. I appreciate, my friend. You are so generous with your time today. It's been such a pleasure talking to you. Let me just do a couple of more plugs. The new audio edition of Liar's Poker is out. Against the Rules, new podcast is out. You gotta get it. Gotta listen to that. And although it's a year old, let me also just, because it's just still so relevant today, the Premonition pandemic story and everything else Michael Lewis does. You can't get enough of it. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you, Donny.
Thanks for listening to On Brand with Donny Deutsch. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe anywhere you get podcasts, Apple, Spotify, any place else. Please rate us and please subscribe and review us. And you can watch our videos on YouTube. You can subscribe on YouTube. We'd love if you do that and leave your comments. And have a safe week. We'll see you next. We'll see you. Maybe we'll see you. Maybe you listen to us next time on Brand with Donny Deutsch. Everybody, thanks for watching. If you like it, hit that subscribe button. And we love having you here watching On Brand. And just don't miss any future episodes. So don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We'll see you next time.